Her face hit the marble floor at 3:17 a.m. Margaret Sullivan, the woman who'd built a $400 million empire, who'd fired 3 executives last Tuesday without blinking, who hadn't cried since her father's funeral 20 years ago, lay crumpled in the hallway of her own building, half her body refusing to obey. Her left leg was dead meat, her left arm a stranger's limb. "I can't walk," she gasped into empty air. "Please, someone, I can't walk." The janitor's cart rolled out of the shadows, and the man pushing it was about to destroy everything she believed about strength, success, and what it means to stand. Comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like indifferent witnesses. Margaret clawed at the polished floor, her manicured nails scraping uselessly against marble that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. "Move, move, damn you, move!" Her brain screamed the command. Her left leg ignored it completely. 62 years old, 62 years of fighting, climbing, winning, and now she was crawling toward a phone 30 feet away like a wounded animal. The cleaning cart stopped. Footsteps approached. Ma'am, can you hear me?" A man dropped to his knees beside her, middle-aged, work-worn hands gray at his temples. His name tag read Samuel. She'd passed him 1,000 times in these hallways and never once looked at his face. "Don't move," he said, fingers pressing against her wrist, checking her pulse. "I've got you. You're not alone." "I can't." The words came out slurred wrong. "I can't walk. My leg won't." I know. His voice was steady as stone. "I'm calling 911 right now. Just stay with me, okay? Stay with me." He pulled out his phone, dialed with one hand, while the other remained on her shoulder, grounding her, holding her to something solid, while her body betrayed everything she'd ever believed about herself. "This is Samuel Webb. I'm at the Morrison Building, 22nd floor. I have a woman here, mid-60s, possible stroke. Left side paralysis, slurred speech. She's conscious, but deteriorating. Send someone fast." He hung up, looked into her eyes. 2 minutes. They'll be here in 2 minutes. Margaret tried to speak, to explain that she had a board meeting at 8, that the Henderson acquisition needed her signature, that she couldn't afford this interruption. What came out was scared. She hadn't said that word out loud in 40 years. Samuel's expression didn't change. He didn't look at her with pity, didn't treat her like she was already dead. He just nodded. "I know, anyone would be. But you called for help, which means you're fighting. That's good. That's real good." He shrugged off his jacket, folded it carefully, slid it under her head. The fabric smelled like laundry detergent and coffee, and something else, cinnamon maybe, or maple syrup. A father's smell. A morning routine smell. "You have family?" he asked. "Someone I should call?" Margaret closed her eyes. No husband, divorced twice. No children, never had time. Parents dead. Sister estranged for 15 years over money and pride, and things that seemed so important back then. "No," she whispered. "No one." Samuel didn't flinch. "That's all right. I'll ride with you to the hospital. Someone should be there when you wake up." "You don't..." She struggled to form words. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." He smiled, small and sad. "I want to. Nobody should go through this alone." The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began strobing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Margaret felt tears sliding down her face. When had she started crying, and couldn't summon the strength to be embarrassed? "What's your name?" Samuel asked. Margaret Sullivan." "I know who you are, Ms. Sullivan. I've cleaned your office for 3 years. No accusation in his voice, just fact. "You work harder than anyone in this building, longer hours than people half your age. I always wondered who you were working so hard for." The question hit her harder than the stroke. Who was she working for? The paramedics burst through the stairwell doors, and the world dissolved into urgent voices and latex gloves, and the strange weightlessness of being lifted onto a stretcher. The last thing Margaret heard before the elevator doors closed was Samuel's voice speaking to one of the EMTs. Her name is Margaret Sullivan. She's 62. She was working alone when it happened. I'll follow in my car. He knew her name. He knew her age. He'd watched her for 3 years, and she'd never once asked his. The realization burned worse than the stroke. The hospital smelled like every hospital Margaret had ever avoided. Antiseptic and fear. Hope and its opposite. She woke in stages, consciousness returning in fragments. White ceiling, beeping monitors, the weight of blankets across her chest, fluorescent lights that reminded her of the hallway where she'd fallen. Her left side felt wrong. Dead, like it belonged to someone else's body. She tried to sit up. Easy there. A nurse appeared, hands pressing her back against pillows. You're at St. Vincent's. You had an ischemic stroke affecting your motor cortex. Dr. Patterson will explain everything, but right now you need to rest. I can't rest. The words came out slurred, but understandable. I have a company to run. I have Ms. Sullivan. The nurse's voice was firm but kind. Your brain just lost blood flow. Your left side is paralyzed. We need to run more tests, but right now your only job is lying in this bed and letting your body heal. Paralyzed. Margaret repeated the word like she didn't understand it. Permanently. We don't know yet. Dr. Patterson. I want to talk to Dr. Patterson, now. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. I'll page him. But please try to stay calm. Stress is what put you here. She left. Margaret stared at the ceiling and tried to wiggle her left toes. Nothing. She tried to lift her left arm. Nothing. She tried to clench her left fist. Nothing. 62 years of controlling everything, every deal, every negotiation, every outcome. And now she couldn't control her own fingers. The panic came like a wave, crushing and cold. She'd built her entire life on the belief that hard work conquered everything. That willpower was enough. That she didn't need anyone because she could handle anything alone. Now she couldn't walk to the bathroom without help. Dr. Patterson arrived an hour later. 50-something, silver-haired, the kind of face that had delivered bad news so often it had learned to do it gently. Ms. Sullivan, I'm glad you're awake. Tell me the truth, Margaret said. No sugarcoating. How bad is it? He sat down, met her eyes directly. She appreciated that. You had a significant stroke. The good news is you got treatment quickly. Whoever called 911 likely saved your life. The bad news is you've lost motor function on your left side. We don't know yet how much will come back. Best case scenario. With intensive physical therapy, 6 months to a year, you could regain most function, maybe all of it. The brain can rewire itself. Worst case. He paused. You may need assistance for the rest of your life. Wheelchair. Caretakers. Adaptive equipment. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. I'm supposed to chair a board meeting next week. The Henderson acquisition. Ms. Sullivan. Dr. Patterson leaned forward. You can't walk right now. You can barely lift your left arm. We're talking about relearning basic motor functions before we discuss board meetings. I don't have time for this. With respect, ma'am, you don't have a choice. The words landed like a verdict. There's a man in the waiting room, Dr. Patterson continued. Samuel Webb. He's been here since you arrived. Hasn't left. He says he's happy to stay as long as you need someone. Margaret closed her eyes. The janitor. The man whose name she'd never bothered to learn, who'd wrapped his jacket under her head and called 911 and promised to ride with her. Tell him to go home. He doesn't need to. I'm not going anywhere. Margaret's eyes snapped open. Samuel stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, a cup of coffee in his hand, and something unreadable in his expression. Visiting hours don't start for another 2 hours, Dr. Patterson said. I know one of the nurses. Samuel stepped inside, pulled up a chair beside Margaret's bed. Told her I'd be quiet. That okay with you, Ms. Sullivan? She wanted to say no. She wanted to say she didn't need charity from the cleaning staff, didn't need witnesses to her weakness, didn't need anyone seeing her like this. Instead, she said, "Why? Why what? Why are you here? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Samuel set down his coffee. "You're right. I don't know you. But I know what it's like to be scared and alone in a hospital room. I know what it's like to feel like your body's betraying you. And I know that nobody should go through that without someone in their corner. You've been through this." "Not me." His jaw tightened. "My son, Jackson. Born 10 weeks premature, barely 2 pounds. Doctors said he might not survive the night. And if he did survive, he might never walk. Normally, might have developmental delays, might be..." He trailed off, stared at the wall. "What happened?" Margaret asked, surprised to find she actually wanted to know. "He fought. Every single day he fought. And I sat in a room just like this one, watching him hooked up to machines, feeling completely useless." Samuel's voice roughened. "Know what I learned? That being there matters. Even when you can't fix anything. Even when all you can do is sit and wait and pray. Being there matters." "Is he okay? Your son?" Samuel smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "He's 12 now, runs track at his middle school, fast as hell. Drives me crazy, actually." He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo, a grinning kid with Samuel's eyes standing on a winner's podium medal around his neck. "The doctors said he might never walk." Samuel continued. 2 years of therapy, 3 surgeries, more scares than I can count. But he walks, he runs, he lives." Margaret stared at the photo, at the boy who'd beaten the odds, at the father who'd refused to leave his side. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "I've never been weak before. I've never needed help. Ms. Sullivan, can I tell you something?" "Margaret. Call me Margaret." "Margaret." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I watched my son fight for 2 years. Know what the hardest part was? Not the surgeries, not the setbacks. The hardest part was learning that needing help isn't weakness. That letting people carry what you can't, that's not failure. That's survival. I've spent my whole life not needing anyone. How's that worked out for you?" The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't judgmental. It was honest. And it hit Margaret like a punch to the chest. She was 62 years old. She had a company worth $400 million and a penthouse she barely saw, and 2 ex-husbands who hated her, and no one to call in a crisis. She'd collapsed at 3 a.m. in an empty building, and the only person who'd cared enough to stay was a janitor she'd never acknowledged. "Not great," she admitted. "Not great at all." Samuel nodded. "That's fair. But here's the thing about hitting bottom. There's nowhere to go but up." They discharged her after 12 days. Margaret moved through the paperwork in a daze, signing forms she barely read, while a social worker explained home care options. She'd need physical therapy, occupational therapy, someone to help with daily tasks, someone to be there at night in case of falls, seizures, another stroke. Her assistant had arranged for a daytime nurse named Ruth, competent, professional, expensive. But nights were still a problem. "I can manage alone," Margaret said. The social worker gave her the look that social workers give when they've heard that lie 1,000 times. "Actually," Samuel said from the doorway, "I might have a solution." He'd appeared every day during her hospital stay, brought her books when she couldn't sleep, brought his son Jackson on Saturday, and the kid had talked her ear off about his track meets until Margaret found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. "I work night shifts," Samuel continued. 9 to 6. I could swing by your place after work, stay until your day nurse arrives. It's just sitting, really, making sure you're safe, if you want." "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask. I offered." He shrugged. "Besides, Jackson's at his mom's place 2 weeks a month. I'd just be going home to an empty apartment anyway." The social worker looked relieved. Margaret looked conflicted. "I'd pay you," she said. "Whatever you want. We can figure that out later." "No, now. I don't accept charity." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "Okay, whatever's fair. But I'm not doing this for money, Margaret. I'm doing it because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because when I was sitting in that NICU watching my son fight for his life, a janitor just like me brought me coffee every night. Never asked for anything, never expected thanks, just showed up. Every single night. Why?" I asked him the same thing. Know what he said? He said, "Somebody did it for me once. Now I'm doing it for you." That's how it works. Samuel picked up her discharge papers, handed them to the nurse. "I figure it's my turn to pass it on, if you'll let me." Margaret Sullivan, the woman who'd fired employees for showing weakness, who'd crushed competitors without mercy, who'd built her entire identity on never needing anyone, looked at this janitor with his worn hands and his kind eyes and found herself saying, "Okay, yes, okay." Her penthouse felt like a museum. All those beautiful things, the art, the furniture, the view, and none of them meant anything. She couldn't climb the stairs to her bedroom. She couldn't reach the shelves where she'd displayed her awards. She couldn't walk to the bathroom without Ruth's arm around her waist. Ruth was efficient and professional and treated her like a patient, which was accurate but felt wrong. Samuel arrived that first night at 9:30 p.m. with a thermos and a backpack. He moved through her space like he belonged there, finding the kitchen, making himself comfortable on the couch. "Nice place," he said, glancing around. "Very clean. My designer picked everything." "Huh." He settled back, pulled a book from his bag, some thriller with a submarine on the cover. "I'll be here if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll stay out of your way." Margaret watched him crack open the novel, already absorbed. Most people faced with her carefully maintained distance either tried to breach it or gave up entirely. Samuel seemed content to just exist beside it. Patient as water. "Samuel." "Thank you." He looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For finding me. For staying. For—" She gestured vaguely at her useless left side at the wheelchair parked by the door at the hospital, bracelet still on her wrist. "For not treating me like I'm already dead." Samuel closed his book. "You're not dead, Margaret. You're injured. There's a difference." "Doesn't feel like it." "Not yet." He smiled, that warm expression she was beginning to crave. "But it will. Give it time." The first week crawled past like punishment. Ruth arrived each morning with brisk efficiency, helped Margaret with the humiliating necessities of bathing and dressing, then put her through exercises that left her sweating and shaking and feeling every one of her 62 years. The physical therapist came 3 times a week. Angela, mid-30s, relentlessly positive in a way that made Margaret want to scream. "Great job. You lifted your arm 3 inches higher than yesterday." Progress. 3 inches. After 6 days. At this rate, she'd be walking again by the time she was 80. Samuel came every night at 9:30, stayed until Ruth arrived at 7. They barely spoke that first week. He read his books, she pretended to sleep, and somehow his presence made the darkness less suffocating. On the 8th night, Margaret couldn't sleep. Pain radiated through her left side. The doctors called it neurological healing, which apparently meant her nerves screaming as they tried to reconnect. She wheeled herself out to the living room and found Samuel awake, sketching something on a yellow legal pad. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. She moved closer, curious despite herself. The page was covered in architectural drawings. Her bathroom reimagined. Grab bars that looked like modern art. A fold-down bench. A shower head at seated height. "What is this?" Samuel held it up. "Your bathroom. I've been thinking about how to make it more accessible without ruining the look. You've got good bones in there, just need some modifications. You can do this, draw like this." He set down the pad. "I used to be an architect, before Jackson was born. Worked at a firm downtown, did high-end residential stuff. Big houses for rich people who wanted everything just so. Margaret stared at him. What happened? My wife left when Jackson was 18 months old. Said she couldn't handle a sick baby, couldn't handle the uncertainty. So she left us both. He said it calmly without bitterness, but Margaret heard the weight underneath. I had to choose. The career that demanded 80-hour weeks, or the kid who needed his father there. Wasn't really a choice. You gave up everything. I gave up a job, Margaret. I kept everything that mattered. She looked at the drawings again. The precise lines, the elegant solutions, the clear talent on the page. You could have been... I know what I could have been. He cut her off gentle but firm. And I know what I am. I'm a father. I'm a decent man. I show up when people need me. That's enough. He tapped the sketch. Want me to make these modifications? I can do the work myself on my days off. Won't cost much beyond materials. The offer was too generous. Too much. Everything in Margaret's experience told her to refuse to maintain boundaries, to never owe anyone anything. But sitting there at 2 a.m. hurting and tired, and more alone than she'd ever been, she found herself saying, "Yes, please. Yes." Samuel smiled. Good. You need to be able to move around your own home. Independence matters. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged what she'd really lost. Not just the ability to walk, but the ability to exist in the world on her own terms. The autonomy she'd spent 62 years building. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Margaret asked. "I haven't earned it. I've never been kind to anyone in my life." Samuel considered this. Maybe that's why. Maybe kindness isn't supposed to be earned. Maybe it's just supposed to be given, and the giving changes everyone involved. He picked up his pad, started sketching again. "Get some sleep, Margaret. Tomorrow's going to be hard. They all are for a while, but I'll be here." She wheeled back to her bedroom before he could see her cry. But as she lay in the dark, listening to the scratch of pencil on paper from the other room, she felt something shift in her chest. Something that felt terrifyingly like hope. The second week, Samuel started bringing dinner. He'd show up with containers from restaurants she'd never heard of, Vietnamese from a place in Little Saigon, tamales, from a woman who sold them out of her apartment barbecue, from a spot with no sign on the door. Each meal came with a story. This guy Carlos, his wife makes these tamales for their church fundraiser. I helped him move some furniture last year, and now he gives me a dozen every Christmas. And Gwen's been making this pho for 40 years. Same recipe his mother taught him in Saigon. He says the secret is the bones. You have to simmer them for 16 hours minimum. Margaret found herself eating more than she had in months. Found herself asking questions about Carlos and Nguyen and the woman who made the best cobbler in the city from a kitchen the size of a closet. "How do you know all these people?" she asked one night, working her way through pulled pork that tasted like heaven. "I clean their offices," Samuel shrugged. "Night shift, you meet people. Security guards, other janitors, the folks who work late because they've got something to prove. You talk, you listen, you learn who makes good tamales. I've worked late for 40 years. I never met anyone." "That's because you weren't looking." He said it without judgment. When you're at the top, you stop seeing the people who make everything work. You look past them. They're part of the furniture. Margaret thought about the hundreds of people she'd overlooked. The assistants, the mailroom workers, the cleaning staff who disappeared her trash and polished her floors and kept her building running. "I've been a terrible person, haven't I?" Samuel considered this. "I don't think you've been terrible. I think you've been scared. You built walls so high you couldn't see over them. Doesn't make you terrible. Makes you human." "I don't know how to be human. I know how to be successful." "Well," he gathered their empty containers. "Lucky for you, you've got time to learn. Probably a lot of time. What else are you going to do? Answer emails?" Despite everything, Margaret laughed. The sound surprised her. When was the last time she'd laughed at anything? There it is, Samuel said, smiling. Knew it was in there somewhere. On the 14th night, Jackson came with his father. The kid was exactly as Margaret remembered from the hospital, all energy and questions, and the particular intensity of children who'd survived things that should have broken them. Dad says you're learning to walk again, Jackson said, dropping onto the couch beside her wheelchair. That's cool. I had to learn to walk again too when I was little. It sucked. But then it was awesome because I could run. Your father told me. He said you're fast. Fastest in my grade. Jackson grinned. Coach says I might make varsity in high school if I keep training. Dad comes to all my meets. He makes signs. Margaret glanced at Samuel, who suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Signs. Big signs. With glitter. Last time he wrote, "Go Jackson, go," and put flames on it. It was kind of embarrassing, but also kind of great. It was very great, Samuel said. The flames were excellent. The flames were crooked, Dad. Artistic choice. Jackson rolled his eyes with the particular drama of 12-year-olds everywhere, then turned back to Margaret. Can I see your wheelchair? Dad said it's really nice. For the next hour, Jackson examined her wheelchair with the focus of an engineer, asked questions about her physical therapy exercises, and explained in exhaustive detail the mechanics of running fast. Margaret found herself engaged in ways she hadn't been in years. The kid didn't care about her company, or her money, or her reputation. He cared about wheelchair technology, and track times, and whether she could make her left arm move yet. Try now, he said. I want to see. Margaret concentrated, sent the signal from her brain to her left hand. The fingers twitched. Just barely, but they twitched. You did it, Jackson shouted. Dad, did you see? She moved her fingers. Samuel's eyes met hers across the room. Something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or the particular understanding of people who'd learned to celebrate small victories. I saw, he said. That's really great, Margaret. After Jackson fell asleep on her couch, exhausted from his own energy, Samuel made coffee, and they sat in the quiet. He's remarkable, Margaret said. You raised him well. He raised himself mostly. I just tried to stay out of the way. That's not true. I see how he looks at you, like you hung the moon. Samuel was quiet for a moment. He saved my life, you know. When Emily left, I was ready to give up. Not in a dramatic way, just stop trying, stop caring. Let the world crush me. But every time I wanted to quit, there was this little kid who needed me to show up. So I showed up, and eventually showing up became living again. Margaret looked at Jackson's sleeping face. I never had children, never wanted them, thought they'd slow me down. Would they have? Probably. She paused. I spent my whole life moving as fast as possible, Samuel, building, acquiring, winning, and now I can't move at all, and I'm realizing I have no idea what I was racing toward. Samuel didn't offer platitudes, didn't tell her it would all make sense someday. He just said, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe starting over at 62 with no idea where you're going. Maybe that's the first honest moment you've had in decades. Margaret looked at him, this janitor with his worn hands and his remarkable son and his steady presence that asked nothing and offered everything. I think you might be the wisest person I've ever met, she said. I'm not wise. I'm just tired. Tired strips away everything except what's true. Jackson stirred on the couch, mumbling something about track practice. Samuel stood to gather him, lift him with the practiced ease of years of practice. Same time tomorrow, he asked. Yes, Margaret said. Same time tomorrow. She watched them leave, the father carrying the son's arm draped trustingly around the father's neck, and felt something break open in her chest. Not her heart this time. Something harder. A wall she'd built 40 years ago and fortified every day since. For the first time in her adult life, Margaret Sullivan wanted to be part of something bigger than herself. She just didn't know yet how to ask. The third week brought a crisis Margaret hadn't expected. She was in the middle of her morning exercises with Angela when her phone rang. The screen showed her CFO's name, Richard Chen, the man she'd groomed for 15 years, the man she'd trusted with everything except the top job. "I need to take this," Margaret said. Angela frowned. "We're in the middle of—" "I need to take this," she answered, wheeling herself toward the window for privacy she didn't really have. "Richard, what's wrong?" "Margaret." His voice was careful. Too careful. "How are you feeling?" "Skip the pleasantries. What happened?" A pause. Then, the board called an emergency meeting. They're concerned about the Henderson acquisition. Without you there to champion it, there's talk of pulling out. Pulling out? That deal is worth $200 million in projected growth. I spent 2 years building that relationship. I know. I told them that. But Harrison is pushing for a different direction. He wants to pivot to the digital market, abandon the traditional retail partnerships. Harrison. David Harrison, the youngest board member, the one who'd been gunning for her position since the day he joined. Margaret had always kept him in check with sheer force of personality. But now she was in a wheelchair, struggling to lift her left arm, and Harrison smelled blood. "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. "I'll be there." "Margaret, I said I'll be there." She hung up before Richard could argue. Angela was staring at her with the particular expression of medical professionals who know their patients are about to do something stupid. "You can't go to a board meeting," Angela said. "You can barely sit upright for an hour without exhausting yourself. Watch me." That night when Samuel arrived, Margaret was at her computer reviewing documents she hadn't touched in 3 weeks. Her left hand was useless, but she'd learned to navigate with her right, hunting and pecking at keys like a first-time typist. "You look like hell," Samuel said, setting down his thermos. "Thank you for that observation." "What's going on?" Margaret explained. "The board meeting. Harrison's power play. The acquisition that represented everything she'd built for the past 2 years. Samuel listened without interrupting, then sat down across from her. "So you're going to wheel into that boardroom half paralyzed and fight for your company?" "Yes." "And then what? You win this battle, save the acquisition, prove you're still the boss. What happens next week when there's another crisis? And the week after that?" "I handle it, like I've always handled it." "Margaret." Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. "You had a stroke 3 weeks ago. Your body is trying to heal. Every time you push yourself like this, you're slowing down your recovery. You might be making it worse. I don't have a choice." "You do have a choice. You're just scared to make it." Margaret's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. That company is everything I have. Everything I am. If I lose it, if you lose it, you'll still be you. You'll still be alive. You'll still have the chance to build something new. I'm 62 years old. I don't have time to build something new." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father worked for the same company for 40 years. Gave them everything, nights, weekends, holidays. When he was 63, they laid him off. Just like that. 40 years of loyalty, and they handed him a box and showed him the door." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Because here's what happened next. My father, who'd spent his whole life being the job, suddenly had to figure out who he was without it. Took him a couple years. Damn near broke him. But eventually he started volunteering at the VA hospital, helping veterans. Turns out that was what he was meant to do all along. He just never had time to find it." "What's your point?" "My point is that losing everything isn't always losing. Sometimes it's finding. Sometimes the universe has to take away what you're holding on to before it can give you what you actually need." Margaret stared at him. "That's easy to say when you're not the one losing." "You think I haven't lost? I lost my wife, lost my career, lost 2 years of my son's life to hospital rooms and surgeries." Samuel's voice hardened. "I know what losing feels like, Margaret. I also know that the things I lost made room for the things I found. Jackson, purpose, the ability to look at myself in the mirror without flinching. I'm not ready to give up. I'm not asking you to give up. I'm asking you to consider that there might be more than one way to win. Margaret turned back to her computer. I'm going to that meeting tomorrow. Samuel stood. I know you are, and I'll be here when you get back no matter how it goes. But I want you to think about something while you're sitting in that boardroom, fighting for a company that almost killed you. What? Is this the hill you want to die on, literally? He went to the kitchen to make tea, and Margaret stared at the spreadsheets on her screen until the numbers blurred together. The next morning, Ruth helped her dress in her sharpest suit, modified now with Velcro closures that Samuel had quietly arranged to have sewn in. Margaret looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, thinner than before, grayer. The left side of her face still slightly drooped, though the doctor said that would improve with time. You look powerful, Ruth said. I look old. You look like a woman who's survived something. That's its own kind of power. The car service Richard had arranged pulled up at exactly 9:15. Margaret transferred from wheelchair to back seat with the help of a driver who'd been briefed not to offer too much assistance. She still had her pride, even if she'd lost everything else. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of watching the city slide past, seeing it from a perspective she'd never had before. The curb cuts, the narrow doorways, the stairs that led everywhere important. When had the world become so inaccessible? It always was a voice in her head answered. You just never noticed, because you could walk. The Morrison Building's lobby was exactly as she remembered. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, that massive chandelier she'd commissioned when the company went public. She'd walked across this lobby 10,000 times, heels clicking with authority. Now she wheeled across it, every eye in the place tracking her movement. The elevator to the 40th floor boardroom felt smaller than before, more claustrophobic. When the doors opened, Richard was waiting. Margaret, you made it. Of course I made it. Did you think I wouldn't? Richard fell into step beside her, or tried to. Her wheelchair moved slower than his usual pace, and he had to consciously adjust. Margaret noticed. She noticed everything now. Harrison's been lobbying all morning, Richard said quietly. He's got Williams and Foster on his side. Maybe Chen, I can't tell. The others are waiting to see which way the wind blows. And which way is the wind blowing? Richard hesitated. Honestly, not good. They're scared, Margaret. The stroke, the uncertainty, the fact that you've been out for 3 weeks. They're looking for reassurance, and Harrison's giving it to them. Harrison's giving them a fantasy. His digital pivot would gut our core business. I know that, you know that, but they don't. They just see a young, hungry executive with a confident plan versus... He trailed off. Versus a 62-year-old woman in a wheelchair who might stroke out in the middle of a presentation. Richard winced. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. They reached the boardroom doors. Margaret paused, took a breath, and squared her shoulders as best she could. Open them, she said. The boardroom fell silent when she entered. 12 faces turned toward her, some sympathetic, some calculating, some carefully neutral. Harrison sat at the far end of the table, looking like a man who'd already won. Margaret, the chairman said. Gerald Foster, 70 years old, on the board since the company's founding. We weren't expecting you. Clearly. She wheeled to her usual spot at the head of the table, forcing Harrison to shift his chair to make room. But I thought I should be here for a discussion about the future of my company. The company's future is exactly what we're discussing, Harrison said. And with respect, Margaret, decisions of this magnitude require leadership that can be present. I'm present now. For how long, your doctors? My doctors are my business. The Henderson acquisition is company business. And since I'm still the CEO of this company, I believe my input is relevant. The tension in the room crackled. Foster cleared his throat. Perhaps we should hear both perspectives. David, you've presented your proposal. Margaret, would you like to respond? For the next hour, Margaret fought for her company. She laid out the numbers, the relationships, the strategic value of the Henderson deal. She countered Harrison's digital pivot point by point, showing the risks, the costs, the unrealistic timelines. She was sharp. She was thorough. She was everything she'd always been. But she was also exhausted. By the halfway mark, her left arm was trembling. By the end, her vision was blurring at the edges. She could feel her body betraying her, could see the board members noticing, could watch her credibility draining away with every visible sign of weakness. "Perhaps we should table this discussion," Foster finally said. "Give everyone time to review the materials." "I agree," Harrison said smoothly. "We want to make sure we're considering all factors, including leadership stability." Margaret wanted to snap back, wanted to fire him on the spot, remind everyone in this room that she'd built this empire while Harrison was still in business school, but the words wouldn't come. Her brain felt foggy, her tongue thick. "Fine," she managed. "Table it. But I'll be at the next meeting, and the one after that, and every meeting until this is resolved." She wheeled out of the boardroom before anyone could see her hands shaking. Richard caught up with her at the elevator. "Margaret, that was... you were... Don't. Just don't. You need to go home. You need to rest. I need to save my company. You need to survive long enough to have a company to save." The elevator doors opened. Margaret wheeled inside, turned to face Richard. "He's going to try to push me out," she said. "Harrison, he's going to use this." "Probably, yes." "Will you stop him?" Richard met her eyes. "I'll try. But Margaret, I'm not you. I don't have your history with the board, your relationships with the partners. If Harrison convinces them that you're done, then fight harder. That's what I would do." "That's exactly the problem. You would do anything to win. You'd work yourself to death, literally. And maybe that was fine before, when the only person you were hurting was yourself. But now there are people who care about whether you survive this." "Like who?" Richard's expression shifted. "Like your employees. Like your vendors. Like the thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on this company being run by someone with integrity, not a shark like Harrison." He paused. "Like me. I've worked for you for 15 years, Margaret. I've seen you at your best and your worst, and I'd rather have you alive and consulting than dead at the helm." The doors started to close. Margaret held them open with her good hand. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe there's a way to save the company and save yourself. But you're going to have to let go of some control to find it." She released the doors. They closed, carrying her down to the lobby, and she sat alone with the weight of everything she might be about to lose. Samuel was waiting when she got home. Not on the couch with his book standing at the kitchen counter, cooking something that smelled like comfort. "How'd it go?" he asked without turning around. Margaret wheeled past him to the window, stared out at the city that had never felt like home. "I won the battle. Maybe. The vote's postponed. But I could feel them looking at me, watching for weakness, counting the minutes until I collapse again." Her voice cracked. "I've spent 40 years making myself untouchable. And now one blood clot in my brain has made me the most touchable person in that room." Samuel set down his spatula. Crossed to her. "What did I tell you last night? That losing isn't always losing. And maybe the universe has to take away what I'm holding on to before it can give me what I need." She turned to face him. "But what if what I need is to keep holding on? What if letting go is just giving up?" "There's a difference between letting go and giving up." Samuel pulled up a chair, sat so their eyes were level. "Letting go means trusting that something else will catch you. Giving up means not caring what happens next. Which one feels true for you?" Margaret thought about the boardroom, the hostile faces, the exhaustion that had turned her brain to static, the knowledge that she could do this again tomorrow and the day after, and the day after that, until her body simply refused to carry her anymore. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I've been tired for years, decades maybe, but I didn't know how to stop." "Do you know now?" "No, I don't know anything anymore." Samuel reached out, took her good hand in his. That's a start. Not knowing is where everything real begins. They sat like that for a long moment. The janitor and the CEO holding hands in a penthouse that suddenly felt less like a museum and more like a place where actual living might happen. "Samuel," Margaret said finally. "Yeah." "Will you teach me how to let go without giving up?" "I can try." He squeezed her hand. "But it's going to hurt, and it's going to take time, and you're going to want to quit about 100 times." "I don't quit." "I know. That's what scares me." He went back to the stove, and Margaret watched him cook with the particular attention of someone seeing clearly for the first time. The days that followed were the hardest of Margaret's life. Not because of the physical therapy, though, that was grueling. Not because of the board meetings, though, those were exhausting. The hardest part was the silence. For 40 years, Margaret's life had been filled with noise. Meetings, calls, crises, demands. Every minute scheduled, every second accounted for. Now, for the first time, she had hours with nothing to do but think. The thoughts were not kind. She thought about her first husband, Thomas, who'd left after 3 years because she was never home. She thought about her second husband, Michael, who'd stayed for 7 years and hated every one of them. She thought about the sister she hadn't spoken to since their mother's funeral, when they'd fought over the inheritance like strangers instead of grieving like family. She thought about the people she'd fired, the competitors she'd crushed, the employees who'd worked themselves to exhaustion because she'd demanded it, because she'd modeled it, because she'd made relentless ambition the price of admission to her world. "You're thinking too hard," Samuel said one night, watching her stare at the wall. "I can hear it from here." "How do you know what I'm thinking?" "I don't, but I know that look. It's the look of someone inventorying their regrets." "I have a lot of regrets." "Everyone does. The question is what you do with them." Margaret turned to face him. "What did you do with yours?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I apologized to the people I could apologize to. I made amends where I could make amends. And for the rest, the things I couldn't fix, the people I couldn't reach, I tried to do better. Live differently. Honor the lessons by not repeating the mistakes." That sounds too simple. Simple isn't the same as easy. He set down his book. "When Emily left, I was angry for a long time. Angry at her, angry at the situation, angry at God, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it. I spent months replaying every conversation, every decision, trying to figure out where it all went wrong." "What did you figure out?" "That it wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 things. 1,000 small choices that added up to a life neither of us wanted, and the only way forward was to start making different choices." "Like what?" "Like deciding that being present mattered more than being successful. Like choosing my son over my career, even when it meant living in a 2-bedroom apartment instead of a house in the suburbs. Like finding meaning in work that nobody respects, because the work itself doesn't care about respect, it just needs to be done." Margaret thought about her corner office, her reserved parking space, her name on the building. All the markers of success she'd accumulated like armor. "I don't know who I am without the company," she admitted. "Without the title, the power, the proof that I matter. You matter because you're alive, because you're human, because there's never been anyone exactly like you before, and there never will be again." Samuel leaned forward. "The company, the title, that's what you do. It's not who you are." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that what you do can be taken away. Who you are can't. Not by a board vote, not by a stroke, not by anything except your own choice to stop being yourself." Margaret let that sink in. 40 years of climbing, and she'd never once asked herself who she was climbing for, what she was climbing toward. whether the summit even mattered once she reached it. "I'm scared," she said, the same words she'd spoken on the floor that night, but different now. Deeper. "I'm scared that if I let go, there'll be nothing left. That everything good about me was tied up in the ambition, and without it, I'm just empty." "There's only one way to find out," Samuel said. "What's that? Let go. See what's underneath." The phone call came 3 days later. Richard's voice was tight, controlled the way it got when he was delivering bad news. "The board voted. Emergency session this morning. Without me?" They claimed it was procedural. "Harrison pushed through a resolution, temporary leadership transition while you're recovering. He's acting CEO effective immediately." Margaret felt the world tilt sideways. "They can't do that. The bylaws require—" They cited medical emergency provisions. "Your doctors submitted reports about your condition. I don't know how Harrison got them, but he did." "That's illegal. That's a HIPAA violation." "Maybe. But by the time lawyers get involved, he'll have 6 months of operational control. That's enough time to gut everything you've built." Margaret's chest tightened. Her heart monitor beeped a warning. She forced herself to breathe, counting the way Angela had taught her. "What are my options?" "You could fight it legally. But that takes time and energy, both of which you don't have." "Or—" Richard hesitated. "Or what?" "Or you could negotiate. Step back voluntarily in exchange for protections. Consultant roll board seat, veto power over major decisions. Let Harrison have the title while you keep the influence." "That's surrender. That's strategy. You taught me that, Margaret. Sometimes you lose the battle to win the war." After she hung up, Margaret sat in her wheelchair and stared at her hands. Her left hand was stronger now. She could almost close it into a fist, but it still felt foreign, borrowed. Samuel found her like that when he arrived for his shift. "I heard," he said, sitting across from her. "Richard called me." "He shouldn't have. He cares about you, more than you realize. He cares about the company. He cares about both. It's possible to care about more than one thing." Samuel leaned back. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You've known since the moment you hung up the phone. You just don't want to admit it." Margaret looked at him, really looked, in a way she'd never looked at anyone before. At the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the calm certainty in his expression. "I want to let go," she said slowly. "I want to stop fighting. I want to find out who I am without the title and the power and the constant war." She paused. "But I don't know how. I've never stopped fighting in my life." "You don't have to stop fighting. You just have to choose what you're fighting for." "And what should I fight for?" "That's not for me to say, but I can tell you what I see if you want." "Tell me." Samuel leaned forward. "I see a woman who spent 40 years building something impressive and completely empty. I see someone who's achieved more than most people dream of and enjoyed almost none of it. I see a heart that's learned to survive, but never learned to live. That's what you see. That's what I saw. Past tense." His expression softened. "What I see now is someone who's starting to wake up, someone who's asking questions she's never asked before, someone who's scared as hell but showing up anyway. That's not weakness, Margaret. That's the beginning of everything real." Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. When had she started crying? "I don't know how to be real," she whispered. "I only know how to be impressive." "Then start small. Be real with me. Be real with Jackson. Be real with one person at a time, and eventually real becomes the only way you know how to be." "Is that how it worked for you?" Samuel nodded. "After Emily left, I put on a brave face for Jackson. Pretended everything was fine. But kids aren't stupid. He knew something was wrong. So one night I just told him the truth. Told him I was scared and sad and didn't know what was going to happen next. You know what he said?" "What?" "He said, 'That's okay, Daddy. I'm scared too. But we can be scared together.' He was 4 years old." Samuel's voice roughened. My son taught me that honesty is the only thing that connects us. Everything else is just performance. Margaret thought about all the performances she'd given. The board meetings, the investor calls, the public appearances where she'd worn confidence like armor. Every moment calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact. When had she last said something true? I'm terrified, she said, of dying, of being forgotten, of finding out that I wasted my whole life chasing things that don't matter. Good, Samuel said. That's true. Now we're getting somewhere. It doesn't feel good. It feels like falling. Because it is falling. But here's what I've learned about falling. He reached out, took her hand. You can't know what's going to catch you until you let go. And sometimes what catches you is better than anything you were holding on to. That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She sat at her window watching the city lights, thinking about everything Samuel had said. About letting go. About falling. About what might catch her if she finally stopped fighting. At 4 a.m. she picked up her phone and called her sister. Ellen? It's Margaret. No, nothing's wrong. Well, something's wrong, but not like that. She took a breath. I'm sorry. For everything. For the lawsuit and the things I said at Mom's funeral and the 30 years of silence. I'm sorry. The conversation lasted 3 hours. They cried. They yelled. They apologized for things neither of them had thought about in decades. And when they finally hung up, Margaret felt something release in her chest. Something she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. When Samuel arrived the next morning to pick up his things, she was waiting for him. I made a decision, she said, about the company. What did you decide? I'm going to negotiate. Step back voluntarily. Let Harrison have his moment while I figure out what I actually want. She paused. And I called my sister last night. Samuel's eyebrows rose. The one you haven't spoken to in 30 years. That one. We talked until dawn. We're going to try. Try to be family again. Margaret. Samuel's voice was soft. That's huge. It's terrifying. I don't know how to be a sister. I barely know how to be a human. You're learning. That's what matters. Margaret looked at him. This man who'd found her broken on a marble floor and refused to leave, who'd shown up every night for a month and asked nothing in return, who'd somehow become the most important person in her life without either of them planning it. Samuel, she said, when I'm better, when I can walk again, when all this is resolved, what happens then? Do you just go back to cleaning offices? Go back to your regular life like none of this happened? Samuel was quiet for a moment. Is that what you want? No, that's not what I want at all. Then what do you want? Margaret took a breath, the deepest breath of her life. I want to find out what comes next, with you, whatever that means. Samuel's face transformed, that smile she'd come to crave breaking across his features like sunrise. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. He took her hand, her left hand, the one that had been dead weight 3 weeks ago, and now could almost squeeze back, and they sat together in the morning light, two people who'd found each other at the bottom and decided to climb back up together. Margaret didn't know where they were going, didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in her life, she realized that not knowing wasn't the same as losing. Sometimes not knowing was just the beginning. The negotiation with the board took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of phone calls and legal documents and carefully worded agreements that felt like signing away pieces of herself. Margaret surrendered the CEO title, accepted a consulting role with limited hours, retained her board seat with diminished voting power. Harrison got everything he wanted, almost. You're sure about this? Richard asked during their final call before the papers were signed. Once this goes through, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. You built this company from nothing, Margaret. 40 years of your life. I know what I built. I also know what it cost me. She looked at her left hand, now strong enough to hold a pen. Some prices are too high. Richard was silent for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. The Margaret Sullivan I knew 5 years ago would have fought until it killed her. It almost did kill me, that's the point. The signing ceremony happened via video call. Margaret refused to go back into that building, refused to give Harrison the satisfaction of watching her wheel into his territory. She signed with her right hand, while her left rested on the arm of her wheelchair, and when it was done, she felt nothing. No relief, no grief. Just emptiness where the anger used to be. Samuel found her that evening, staring at the document, the official record of her surrender. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel something. Sad maybe, or free. But I just feel hollow." "That's normal." He sat beside her. "When you've been carrying something for 40 years and suddenly put it down, your arms don't know what to do. They're still shaped like they're holding something." "How long does that last?" "Depends. Some people find something new to carry. Some people learn to walk with their hands empty. Most people do a little of both." Margaret set down the document. "What did you do after you left architecture?" "I grieved. Not for the career, for the person I thought I was supposed to be. The successful architect with the beautiful wife and the picture-perfect life. That guy died when Emily left. Took me a while to figure out who was left standing." "And who was left?" Samuel smiled. "Just me. A tired single father who was good at cleaning things and better at showing up. Turns out that was enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to build a life worth living." The physical therapy intensified after that. Angela pushed harder, demanded more, celebrated smaller victories with the same aggressive enthusiasm she brought to everything. 3 steps today, she announced. Yesterday it was 2, tomorrow we're going for 4. "I'm 62 years old," Margaret said, gripping the parallel bars with white-knuckled determination. "I should be running marathons, not celebrating 3 steps. You should be grateful you're walking at all. Most stroke patients your age don't recover this fast." "I'm not most patients." "No." Angela grinned. "You're the most stubborn patient I've ever had. Now give me 1 more step." Margaret gave her 2, then collapsed into her wheelchair with sweat dripping down her face and her heart pounding against her ribs. Progress felt like punishment, but it was progress. Ellen came to visit on a Tuesday. Margaret's sister, whom she hadn't seen in person since their mother's funeral, walked through the penthouse door, looking older and softer and terrified. "Margaret?" Ellen stopped 3 feet away, uncertain. "You look like hell." "I know." "I was going to say alive. You look alive." They stared at each other across 30 years of silence. Margaret saw herself in Ellen's face, the same bone structure, the same stubborn jaw, and wondered how they'd become strangers. "I don't know how to do this," Margaret admitted. "I don't know how to have a sister." "Me neither." Ellen took a tentative step forward. "But I'd like to learn. If you would." "I would. Yes." They sat together for hours, filling in the gaps. Ellen talked about her husband, her children, the grandchildren Margaret had never met. Margaret talked about the company, the stroke, the janitor who'd found her on the floor and refused to leave. "You're in love with him," Ellen said, not asking. "I don't know what I am. I've never been in love before, not really." "How is that possible? You were married twice." "I was married twice to men I thought I should want." Thomas was ambitious. Michael was successful. Neither of them was. What? Margaret thought about Samuel, his steady presence, his refusal to be impressed by her money or intimidated by her walls, the way he showed up every night with his thermos and his books and his endless patience. "Kind," she finally said. "Neither of them was kind. I didn't even know kindness mattered until I was lying on a floor at 3 a.m., unable to move, and a stranger wrapped his jacket under my head. Ellen reached across the table and took her hand. You deserve kindness, Margaret. You always did. You just forgot. I didn't forget. I decided it was a weakness, that I couldn't afford it. And now I'm starting to think it might be the only thing worth affording. Jackson started coming over after school. Samuel would pick him up, bring him to Margaret's penthouse, and the kid would do his homework at her dining table while she did her exercises in the next room. Your apartment is weird, Jackson announced one afternoon. It doesn't have any stuff. What do you mean? Like stuff? Pictures, things you made, magnets on the refrigerator. He gestured around at the pristine space. It looks like a hotel. Margaret looked at her home through his eyes. He was right. No personal touches. No evidence that anyone actually lived here. Just expensive furniture arranged for maximum aesthetic impact. I never had time for stuff, she said. That's sad. Jackson said it matter-of-factly without judgment. My room has tons of stuff. Dad says it looks like a tornado hit it, but I know where everything is. What kind of stuff? Trophies from track. Pictures I drew when I was little. A rock collection I started in 2nd grade. My mom's last birthday card to me before she left. He paused. I keep that one in my sock drawer so it doesn't get lost. Margaret felt something tighten in her chest. Do you miss her? Your mom. Sometimes. Mostly I miss having a mom, not her specifically. Does that make sense? More than you know. Jackson considered this. Dad says she couldn't handle being scared all the time, that some people run away when things get hard because they don't know how to stay. Your dad is very wise. He's okay. Jackson grinned. He makes good pancakes, and he never missed one of my track meets. Not even when I came in last place, which was a lot at first. Did you get faster? Yeah, because Dad said the only way to get better at something is to keep doing it even when you suck. He said that's true for running and for life. Margaret thought about all the things she'd quit when she wasn't immediately good at them. Relationships, hobbies, anything that didn't contribute to her career. She'd been so focused on winning that she'd never learned how to lose. Your dad's right, she said. I'm learning that the hard way. Are you going to be okay? Jackson asked. Dad worries about you. I can tell because he gets this line between his eyebrows when he's worried, and it's there a lot now. I think I'm going to be okay, eventually. Good. Jackson returned to his homework. Because Dad really likes you, and I think you make him less sad. That night, after Jackson was asleep on the couch and Samuel was making tea in the kitchen, Margaret said, Your son asked if I'm going to be okay. What did you tell him? That I think I will be, eventually. She paused. He also said, I make you less sad. Samuel's hands stilled on the kettle. He's observant. Is it true? He turned to face her. Before I found you, I was surviving, getting through each day, taking care of Jackson, doing my job. But I wasn't really living, hadn't been for years. And now I remember what it feels like to want something, to look forward to something, to think about the future and actually want to be there. I've never made anyone happy before, Margaret said quietly. I've made people rich, made them successful, made them afraid, but not happy. Maybe you never tried. Maybe I didn't know how. Samuel crossed to her wheelchair, knelt so their eyes were level. It's not complicated, Margaret. Happiness isn't about doing impressive things. It's about being present, noticing, caring about someone else's well-being as much as your own. That's what you do. With Jackson. With me. That's what anyone can do, if they decide it matters. Margaret reached out, touched his face. Her left hand, the one that had been dead 3 months ago, now steady enough to trace the lines around his eyes. Teach me, she said, how to make people happy. You're already learning. Samuel smiled. You just don't see it yet. The crisis came without warning. Margaret was in the middle of her afternoon exercises when her phone rang. Richard's name on the screen, his voice urgent when she answered. Harrison called an emergency board meeting, tomorrow morning. About what? He's proposing to dissolve the consulting agreement. Claims you're not contributing enough to justify the expense. Margaret's hands tightened on her walker. That's a violation of the terms we negotiated. He's found a loophole. Something about performance metrics that weren't clearly defined. His lawyers have been working on this for weeks. So he was planning this all along. The negotiation was just buying time. Looks that way. Richard paused. I'm sorry, Margaret. I should have seen it coming. What happens if he succeeds? You lose your board seat, your veto power, any influence you had left. Richard's voice dropped. And he's not stopping there. There's talk of pursuing legal action for breach of fiduciary duty while you were CEO. They're trying to paint your medical situation as evidence of impaired judgment. That's insane. That's Harrison. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to destroy you. Margaret hung up and sat in silence. The walker stood in front of her, mocking her slow progress. 6 steps today, maybe 7 tomorrow. Not enough to walk into a boardroom and fight. Samuel found her an hour later, still sitting in the same spot. Margaret? What happened? She told him. All of it. Harrison's betrayal, the legal threats, the systematic dismantling of everything she'd negotiated. So, what are you going to do? Samuel asked when she finished. I don't know. I thought I was done fighting. I thought I'd made peace with letting go. Letting go isn't the same as lying down. You can release your grip on something and still stand up for yourself. How I can barely stand at all. Samuel pulled up a chair, sat facing her. What does Harrison want? Really want, underneath all the power plays? Margaret thought about it. He wants to prove he's better than me. Smarter, younger, more capable. He's been living in my shadow for 5 years, and this is his chance to step out of it. And what do you want? I want... She stopped. What did she want? A month ago, she would have said victory, revenge, the satisfaction of watching Harrison's career burn. But now, I want to be free, she said slowly. I want to stop carrying this company like it's my identity. I want to build something new instead of defending something old. Then maybe Harrison's doing you a favor. What? Think about it. If he wins tomorrow, what do you lose? The consulting role you didn't want. The board seat that keeps you tied to a company that almost killed you. The last threads connecting you to a life that wasn't working. I lose my reputation, my legacy, everything I built. Your reputation isn't what people think of your career. It's what people think of your character. And your legacy isn't a company, it's the impact you have on actual humans. Samuel leaned forward. Margaret, you spent 40 years building something impressive. Now you have a chance to build something meaningful. But you can't do both. You have to choose. And if I choose to walk away, just let him win. Then you're free, completely free, to build whatever comes next without looking over your shoulder. Margaret stared at him. You want me to surrender. I want you to survive. I want you to be here with me with Jackson building a life instead of defending a monument. His voice roughened. I watched you almost die 3 months ago. I'm not interested in watching you kill yourself fighting for something that doesn't love you back. The company doesn't love me. I know that. Do you? Because every time Harrison makes a move, you react like someone's attacking your child. That's not strategy. That's attachment. And attachment to things that can't love you back, that's what put you on that floor. The words landed like stones. Margaret wanted to argue, to defend herself, to explain that he didn't understand what she'd sacrificed to build that empire. But she did understand. She understood perfectly. I don't know how to let go, she whispered. Yes, you do. You've been learning for 3 months. Every time you ask for help, every time you accept your limitations, every time you choose rest over achievement, that's letting go. This is different. It's the same, just bigger. Samuel took her hand. Let me ask you something. If you had died that night on the floor, if I hadn't found you, if the paramedics hadn't gotten there in time, what would you have regretted? Margaret closed her eyes. She'd thought about this. In the hospital during sleepless nights, in the moments between waking and sleeping when the mind is too tired to lie. I would have regretted not knowing Jackson, not reconciling with Ellen, not finding out what comes next with you. She opened her eyes. I wouldn't have regretted losing the company. I would have regretted dying before I figured out that the company didn't matter. Then why are you still fighting for it? Because I don't know who I am without the fight. Samuel stood, pulled her to her actual feet, supporting her weight with his arms. You're Margaret Sullivan. You survived a stroke. You learned to walk again. You figured out how to be a sister, and maybe a stepmother, and definitely a friend. He held her steady. You're also the woman I'm falling in love with. And I'd rather have you here imperfect and figuring things out than lose you to a war that doesn't matter. You're falling in love with me. I've been falling for months. I just didn't want to say it while you were still married to your company. Margaret laughed, which turned into tears, which turned into something she couldn't name. Grief and joy and terror and hope, all tangled together. I don't deserve you, she said. Probably not, but I'm stubborn. Samuel smiled. Let Harrison have his victory. Let the board think they've won. Then walk away, literally walk, because you can now and never look back. And then what? Then we figure out what comes next. Together. The board meeting happened at 10 a.m. Margaret didn't attend, not even by video call. Instead, she sent a 3-sentence email. I resign my consulting position and board seat effective immediately. I wish the company well. I have no further comments. Richard called 20 minutes later. Margaret, what the hell? I'm out, Richard. Completely. Harrison wins. But the legal threats, the accusations of impaired judgment? Let him accuse. I'm done defending myself to people who've already decided I'm guilty. He'll drag your name through the mud. My name isn't me. I spent 62 years confusing the two. It's time to stop. Richard was silent for a long moment. This isn't the Margaret Sullivan I know. Good. That Margaret Sullivan almost died on a marble floor because she cared more about spreadsheets than her own heartbeat. This Margaret Sullivan is choosing differently. What are you going to do? Margaret looked out the window at the city she'd conquered and never enjoyed. I'm going to learn to walk without a walker. I'm going to meet my sister's grandchildren. I'm going to watch a 12-year-old run track and maybe figure out how to make pancakes. That's not a plan. No, it's a life. It's what I should have had all along. After she hung up, Samuel appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. How do you feel? Margaret took the coffee, wrapped her hands around its warmth. Terrified, relieved, free. She paused. Mostly free. It gets easier. The freedom. At first it feels like falling, but eventually you realize you're flying. I don't know how to fly. Nobody does at first. That's what makes it brave. They stood together at the window, watching the morning light paint the city gold. Somewhere down there, Harrison was claiming his victory, reshaping the company Margaret had built, erasing her name from the legacy she'd sacrificed everything to create. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care. Because the man beside her was holding her hand. Because a 12-year-old boy was coming over after school to do homework at her table. Because her sister had called 3 times this week just to talk. Because she could walk 6 steps without help, and tomorrow it would be 7. The old Margaret Sullivan would have called this defeat. The old Margaret Sullivan would have fought until her heart stopped again, would have sacrificed everything for a company that never loved her back, would have died alone in a corner office surrounded by awards that meant nothing. This Margaret Sullivan, scarred, slower, finally awake, knew better. Victory wasn't holding on tighter. Victory was learning to let go, and she was just getting started. The first week without the company felt like withdrawal. Margaret woke each morning reaching for her phone, expecting crisis emails and urgent decisions. The silence was deafening. "It gets easier," Samuel promised when he found her pacing at 5 a.m., unable to sit still. "The noise in your head quiets down eventually." When? Different for everyone. Took me about 3 months to stop dreaming about blueprints. I don't have 3 months of patience. Good thing patience is a muscle. You can train it. Margaret glared at him, but there was no heat in it. He was right, and she hated that he was right, and she was grateful that he was right, all at the same time. Angela increased her therapy sessions to 5 days a week. "You've got more time now," she said cheerfully. "Might as well use it." "I had time before." "No, you had minutes between crises. Now you have actual time. Big difference." The distinction mattered more than Margaret expected. Before, every therapy session had felt like an interruption, something to endure before returning to real life. Now, with nothing to return to, she found herself actually present, noticing the way her left leg responded to commands, feeling the neural pathways rebuilding themselves, one electrical signal at a time. 10 steps today, Angela announced at the end of week 2. Without the walker, just the cane. Is that good? That's remarkable. Most patients your age plateau around now. You're still climbing. I don't know how to plateau. It's not in my vocabulary. Angela laughed. That's exactly what I mean. Your stubbornness is finally working for you instead of against you. Jackson noticed the progress first. He'd taken to timing her walks around the apartment, announcing her speed with the seriousness of a sports commentator. 14 seconds faster than yesterday, he reported, stopwatch in hand. You're getting faster, not as fast as me, but faster. Thank you for that ego boost. You're welcome. He grinned. Dad says I should be encouraging. Is that encouraging enough? It's perfect. Samuel watched these interactions with an expression Margaret was learning to read: pride mixed with something softer. Hope, maybe. Or relief. He's never had a woman in his life, Samuel said one evening after Jackson had gone home. Not since he was a baby. I didn't realize how much he needed that until I watched him with you. I'm not exactly maternal material. Who said anything about maternal? You're just present. You listen to him. You take him seriously. That's more than most adults do. He's easy to take seriously. He's smarter than half the executives I used to manage. Don't tell him that. His head's already big enough. Ellen called every few days now, their conversations growing longer and easier. She sent photos of her grandchildren, 3 of them, aged 2 to 7, and Margaret found herself studying their faces, looking for family resemblance. The oldest one has Mom's eyes, Ellen said during one call. Remember how she used to look at us when we were fighting? That exact expression. I remember. I hated that look. Me too. But I miss it now. They talked about their mother for the first time in decades, about the sacrifices she'd made raising 2 daughters alone after their father left, about the double shifts and the empty refrigerators and the way she'd always managed to find money for birthday presents even when money was impossible. She would have liked Samuel, Ellen said. You think so? She always said the measure of a man wasn't what he built, but what he was willing to give up. Samuel gave up everything for his son. Mom would have respected that. Margaret thought about her father, who'd given up nothing and taken everything, who'd walked out when she was 12 and never looked back, who'd taught her through his absence that the only person she could rely on was herself. I've spent my whole life trying not to be Dad, she admitted. Me too. Ellen's voice softened. But somewhere along the way we both became him anyway, just in different directions. I ran from success because I was afraid it would make me cold like him. You ran toward it because you were afraid failure would make you weak like you thought he was. He wasn't weak. He was selfish. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe weakness is just selfishness disguised as survival. The insight hit Margaret like a physical blow. All those years of telling herself that needing people was weakness, when really the weak thing was refusing to be needed. Refusing to let anyone depend on her, because then she'd have to care about someone other than herself. I was selfish, she said. For 40 years, I told myself it was ambition, but it was just fear. Fear of being hurt, like Mom was hurt. Fear of depending on someone who'd leave. And now? Now I'm tired of being afraid. Samuel proposed on a Tuesday, not with a ring or a fancy dinner or any of the theatrical gestures Margaret had come to expect from men who wanted something. He just looked up from the breakfast dishes and said, "Move in with us." Margaret set down her coffee cup. "What?" "Move in with us, Jackson and me. We've got a spare room that's too big for just storage. You've got a penthouse that feels like a museum. Seems like an obvious solution. You want me to move into your apartment? I want you to move into our life. Officially. Permanently." He dried his hands, turned to face her fully. "I'm not good at speeches, Margaret. I'm not going to pretend I have the right words for this. But I know that I wake up thinking about you. I know that Jackson asks every morning if you're coming over. I know that this past 4 months watching you fight, watching you grow, watching you become someone neither of us expected has been the best thing that's happened to me since my son was born. Samuel, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's not what you want. But I am asking you to stop pretending we're just friends who happen to meet in a crisis. I'm asking you to bet on us." Margaret thought about her penthouse, the empty rooms, the expensive furniture that no one ever sat on, the silence that had felt like success and now felt like loneliness. "Your apartment has 1 bathroom, she said. "We'll make it work. Jackson's room is next to yours. There's no privacy. We'll figure it out." I snore. Apparently, according to Ruth. "I don't care. I'm difficult. I'm demanding. I've never lived with anyone successfully in my entire life. Neither have I. Not since Emily." Samuel stepped closer. "But I'd rather fail at living with you than succeed at living without you." Margaret felt tears threatening. She'd cried more in the past 4 months than in the previous 40 years combined. "This is insane. We've known each other for 4 months. I've known you my whole life. I just didn't meet you until February. That doesn't make any sense. Love doesn't make sense. It just is." He took her hands, both of them, her left hand strong enough now to grip back. "Say yes, Margaret. Take the risk. Jump off the cliff and trust that something will catch you. What if nothing catches me? Then we'll fall together. But I don't think we will." Margaret looked at this man, this janitor, this single father, this quiet hero who'd found her at her lowest and loved her anyway. A year ago, she would have laughed at the idea. A year ago, she would have calculated the risks and found them unacceptable. But a year ago, she'd been dying without knowing it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll move in. Yes, I'll bet on us. Yes to all of it." Samuel kissed her, not gently this time, urgently, hungrily, like a man who'd been waiting for permission. Margaret kissed him back with everything she had, and somewhere in the middle of it, she realized she was standing. Without help, without her cane, just standing on her own 2 feet in a kitchen that didn't belong to her, kissing a man who did. "Dad, why are you kissing Margaret?" They broke apart. Jackson stood in the doorway, backpack over his shoulder, eyes wide with 12-year-old horror. "Because I asked her to move in with us," Samuel said, not letting go of Margaret's hand. "And she said yes." Jackson's expression shifted from horror to calculation to something that looked suspiciously like triumph. "Finally, I've been waiting forever." "You've been waiting?" "Obviously. You guys look at each other like people in movies. It was kind of gross, but also kind of nice." He dropped his backpack on the floor. "Does this mean I can have pancakes for dinner to celebrate?" "It means you can have pancakes for dinner." Samuel agreed. Yes. Jackson pumped his fist. Best day ever. Margaret's moving in and we're having pancakes. Margaret laughed a real laugh, full and free. I'm glad my major life decision ranks equally with breakfast food. Pancakes are important, Jackson said seriously. They're round like life. Everything comes back around. Samuel and Margaret exchanged looks. Where did you learn that? Samuel asked. I made it up just now. Pretty good, right? Pretty good, Margaret agreed. Pretty good. Moving out of the penthouse took longer than expected. Not because Margaret had so much to pack she didn't, but because she kept finding things she'd forgotten. Old photographs buried in closets. Letters from her mother she'd never answered. A first-edition book her grandmother had given her for college graduation, still in its original wrapping. You never opened it? Samuel asked, helping her sort through boxes. I never had time. What is it? Margaret carefully removed the yellowed paper. Inside was a copy of Little Women, worn clearly second-hand with a handwritten inscription on the first page. To my Margaret, she read aloud. May you find your own way to be extraordinary. Love always, Grandma Rose. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She died 2 years after she gave me this. I was so busy with my first job that I missed her funeral. Margaret? I told myself I'd visit when things settled down, when I had more time, when the next deal closed. She traced the inscription with her finger. There was always another excuse. Samuel sat beside her on the floor, surrounded by the debris of her old life. You can't change the past, but you can learn from it. What's the lesson? Don't work so hard. Don't prioritize career over family. The lesson is that time isn't guaranteed, that the people we love won't wait forever, that someday is a lie we tell ourselves when we're scared to act today. Margaret closed the book, held it against her chest. I wasted so much time. Or you were preparing, learning what doesn't work so you'd recognize what does. That's a generous interpretation. It's the only one that helps. Samuel kissed her forehead. You're here now. That's what matters. They finished packing in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who don't need words to communicate. Jackson's room was exactly as he'd described, a tornado of trophies, drawings, and mysterious collections. Margaret's room was the spare bedroom, small but clean, with a window that looked out over a parking lot instead of a cityscape. It's not the penthouse, Samuel said apologetically. The penthouse was a prison. This is a home. The adjustment wasn't easy. After 62 years of solitude, sharing space with another person, let alone 2 required skills, Margaret had never developed. She complained about Samuel's coffee being too strong. She griped about Jackson's music being too loud. She couldn't figure out the shower controls and flooded the bathroom twice in the first week. I'm terrible at this, she confessed one night after burning dinner and setting off the smoke alarm. You're learning, Samuel corrected. There's a difference. I've never had to learn domestic things. I had staff. Well, now you have us. We're not as efficient as staff, but we're more fun. Jackson appeared in the kitchen doorway, waving a towel at the lingering smoke. Is Margaret trying to cook again? I was making pasta. It's not complicated. You burned water, Margaret. That's actually kind of impressive. The pot was defective. The pot was fine. You just forgot about it. Jackson grinned. It's okay. Dad burned mac and cheese last month. We almost had to call the fire department. That was one time, Samuel protested. One time is all it takes to become a family legend. Margaret found herself laughing despite the disaster. A family legend for burning pasta. We have low standards, Jackson said, but we're very loyal. The track meet happened in April. Jackson had been training for months, and the regional championship was his chance to prove he belonged with the older kids. You don't have to come, he said the morning of the competition, but his eyes said something different. Of course we're coming, Margaret replied. I wouldn't miss it. You've never been to a track meet before. I've never done a lot of things before. That's changing. The stadium was larger than Margaret expected, filled with families and teenagers and the particular energy of competitive athletics. Samuel had brought a sign glittery letters spelling "Go Jackson Go" with meticulously drawn flames. The flames are still crooked, Jackson observed. Artistic choice, Samuel said. You always say that. Because it's always true. Margaret watched Jackson warm up stretching muscles that had once failed him running practice sprints on legs that doctors had said might never work. She thought about her own body, the left side that had betrayed her, the heart that had stopped the brain that had short-circuited. He's remarkable, she said to Samuel. He is. So are you, for not giving up on him. Samuel shook his head. He didn't give me a choice. Every time I wanted to quit, he'd do something impossible, smile through pain, try again after failing, refuse to accept limits that everyone else said were permanent. His voice roughened. Kids are like that. They don't know what they can't do, so they do it anyway. I wish I'd been like that. You are like that. You just forgot for a while. The race started with a gunshot. Jackson exploded off the blocks, small for his age, but fierce arms pumping, legs churning. Margaret found herself on her feet, screaming his name, with the other parents, her cane forgotten on the bleacher. He came in third, not first. Not the victory everyone wanted, but a personal best. When he crossed the finish line, his face split into a grin that rivaled the sun. Did you see? He shouted, running to where they sat. I was fast. I was really fast. You were incredible, Margaret said, and meant it. Dad, did you see the finish? I almost caught that tall kid from West Side. I saw everything. Samuel wrapped him in a hug. I'm so proud of you. Margaret, you stood up, without your cane. Margaret looked down at her feet. She was still standing. Had been standing for several minutes, actually, without thinking about it. I guess I did. That's your personal best, too, Jackson said. We both got personal bests on the same day. That's good luck. Samuel met Margaret's eyes over his son's head. That's family, he said quietly. Family is good luck. The call from Richard came 3 weeks later. Harrison's destroying the company, Richard said without preamble. The Henderson deal fell through. The digital pivot is hemorrhaging money. 3 senior executives resigned last week. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because you could come back? The board is desperate. Harrison's lost their confidence. They'd reinstate you tomorrow if you wanted. Margaret stood at the window of Samuel's apartment watching traffic crawl below. 4 months ago, this call would have been a lifeline, a chance to reclaim everything she'd lost, to prove she'd been right all along, to crush Harrison and rebuild her empire. No, she said. No. I don't want to come back. I've moved on. Margaret, this is your company, your legacy, everything you built. It was my company. Now it's their problem. She paused. I'm building something else now. What could possibly be more important than a $400 million empire? Margaret looked around the small apartment, at Jackson's trophies on the shelf, at Samuel's architectural drawings pinned to the wall, at the chaos and warmth and life that filled every corner. Everything, she said. Everything is more important. After she hung up, Samuel appeared behind her. Trouble. Temptation. Harrison's failing. The board wants me back. And I said no. For the first time in my life, I said no to power and meant it. Samuel turned her to face him. How does it feel? Terrifying. Liberating. Mostly liberating. That's growth. That's love. Loving something more than I love winning. Samuel kissed her slow and sweet. Welcome to the other side. Is this what it feels like, being normal? This is what it feels like being alive. Normal is overrated. That night, Jackson asked if they could have a family meeting. He sat them both down at the kitchen table with the seriousness of a diplomat negotiating peace treaties. I have a question, he announced. Go ahead, Samuel said. Are you guys going to get married? Margaret and Samuel exchanged glances. We haven't talked about that, Samuel said carefully. Why not? You love each other. You live together. Margaret cried at my track meet, which means she's officially family. I didn't cry. There was something in my eye. There was crying, Jackson insisted. I saw it. Crying is good. It means you care. He turned to his father. Mom never came to my track meets. Margaret came to her first one and cried. That's better than Mom. The statement hung in the air, heavy with everything it implied. Samuel's jaw tightened. Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Jackson, Samuel said slowly. That's a big thing to say. It's true, though. Margaret's not trying to be my mom. She's just here. She listens. She burns dinner and laughs about it. She doesn't pretend to be perfect. He looked at Margaret directly. I don't want you to go away. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. I promise. Whatever happens between your dad and me, I'm not leaving you. You're stuck with me. Good. Jackson nodded, satisfied. Then you should probably get married. It makes things official. Samuel laughed, breaking the tension. Since when are you a relationship expert? Since always. I'm very observant. He stood apparently finished with the conversation. Can I have ice cream? It's 9 o'clock. So that's a yes. That's a maybe, which means do your homework first. Jackson groaned, but retreated to his room. Samuel and Margaret sat in the silence he left behind. He's right, you know, Samuel said finally. About the ice cream. About us. About making things official. He took her hand. I said I wasn't asking you to marry me, but maybe I should be. Maybe. I've been scared. Scared that you'd realize you could do better. That this life, small apartment, ordinary job, complicated kid isn't enough for someone who had everything. Samuel. Margaret waited until he met her eyes. I had nothing. A company that used me up and spit me out. A penthouse full of expensive things and empty rooms. A life so hollow that when my heart stopped, there was no one to notice. You have options now. The board wants you back. You could rebuild. I don't want to rebuild that life. I want to build this one. With you. With Jackson. She squeezed his hand. I spent 40 years climbing a mountain that led nowhere. Now I've found level ground and people worth walking with. Why would I ever go back? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, Margaret Sullivan, will you marry me? Yes. Just like that. No negotiation, no counteroffers. Just like that. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Samuel pulled her into his arms and held her. Margaret pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, thinking about the night she'd collapsed on cold marble and begged for help. She'd thought she was dying. Turned out she was finally starting to live. We should tell Jackson, she said. He'll want ice cream. Give him ice cream. He earned it. Samuel laughed. You're going to be a terrible influence on him. The best kind of terrible. They found Jackson in his room pretending to do homework while actually watching videos on his tablet. He looked up when they entered, saw their faces, and immediately broke into a grin. You proposed. How did you know? Samuel asked. Because you both look like you're going to cry, and Margaret's holding your hand, and nobody holds hands like that unless something big happened. He jumped off the bed. Does this mean I can call her something other than Margaret now? Margaret knelt on her own power without help, so she was at his level. You can call me whatever feels right. But I'm not trying to replace your mom, Jackson. I'm just trying to be here, whatever that means. What about Maggie? That's like Margaret, but friendlier. Maggie. She tested the word. No one had called her that since she was a child. I like it. Cool. Can I have ice cream now? Yes. Samuel and Margaret said together. Jackson whooped and ran toward the kitchen. Samuel helped Margaret to her feet, and they followed their son. their son now in every way that mattered, into the kitchen, where he was already pulling cartons from the freezer. "Rocky Road or mint chip?" Jackson asked. "Both," Margaret said. "Both is good. Both means you're ones of us." And she was. Finally, after 62 years of trying to be exceptional, Margaret Sullivan had discovered the extraordinary joy of being ordinary, of belonging, of home. The wedding was small. 15 people in Ellen's backyard folding chairs, arranged in crooked rows, wildflowers in mason jars, because Jackson insisted they were more cheerful than roses. "Roses are too serious," he explained while helping arrange them. "You guys aren't serious. You're happy." Margaret adjusted her dress, simple cream-colored, nothing like the designer gowns she'd worn to galas and award ceremonies. This dress came from a department store. Ellen had helped her pick it out during a shopping trip that had devolved into tears and laughter, and trying on ridiculous hats neither of them would ever wear. "Nervous?" Samuel asked, finding her behind the garage 5 minutes before the ceremony. "Terrified. I've done this twice before and failed both times. Third time's the charm." "That's a terrible expression. It implies the first two were curses." "Maybe they were. Maybe everything before now was just preparation for getting it right." Samuel took her hands. "Margaret Sullivan, in about 5 minutes you're going to become Margaret Webb. Any second thoughts?" "Sullivan Webb. I'm keeping my name. Hyphenated." "Fair enough. Any second thoughts?" Margaret looked at him. Really looked. At the gray in his hair, and the lines around his eyes, and the calm certainty in his expression. A year ago, she wouldn't have noticed him, wouldn't have seen past the janitor's uniform and the modest paycheck and all the markers of status she'd been trained to worship. "No second thoughts," she said. "Not even close." The ceremony lasted 12 minutes. Ellen officiated. She'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose, and her voice cracked twice during the vows. Jackson served as ring-bearer and best man simultaneously, which he considered an honor and a burden in equal measure. "Do you have the rings?" Ellen asked. "Obviously." Jackson produced them from his pocket with the gravity of a spy delivering classified documents. "I've been protecting them all day. A kid at school tried to look at them, and I said, 'No way, these are for my dad and Maggie.'" "Your dad and Maggie appreciate the security," Samuel said. "You should. Those things are important." The vows were simple. Margaret had tried to write something elaborate, something worthy of the moment, but every draft felt hollow. In the end, she spoke from memory, from the heart. "I spent my whole life believing strength meant standing alone. Then I fell, and you were there. You taught me that real strength is letting someone stand beside you." She paused, her voice thickening. "I don't promise to be perfect. I don't promise to always get it right. But I promise to show up every day. For you and for Jackson. That's all I have. I hope it's enough." Samuel's vows were shorter. "I found you on a marble floor, unable to walk. You found me in an empty life, unable to feel. We saved each other, Margaret. That's what family does. And now I get to spend the rest of my life watching you walk and run and dance. I can't wait to see where you go." They kissed. Jackson made gagging noises. Ellen cried openly. And Margaret Sullivan Webb became something she'd never thought she'd be: a wife, a stepmother. And finally, after 62 years, a person who belonged somewhere. The reception was hot dogs and potato salad cake from the grocery store, music from Samuel's old speakers. Margaret actually danced on her own feet without help for the first time since before the stroke. Her left leg still dragged slightly, still required conscious effort, but it moved. It obeyed. It carried her through a slow dance with her husband while their son watched from the sidelines with a plate piled high with dessert. "You're getting better," Samuel murmured in her ear. "At dancing. At everything. Living, trusting, being happy. I had good teachers. You had a stubborn kid and a janitor. Not exactly Harvard Business School." "Better than Harvard. Harvard taught me how to win. You taught me how to live." Richard showed up unexpectedly, arriving during the cake cutting with a wrapped gift and an expression that mixed awkwardness with genuine warmth. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "How did you know where to find me?" "Your sister. She said you'd want me here even if you'd never admit it." Margaret looked at Ellen, who shrugged unapologetically. "He was always loyal to you. Loyalty should be rewarded." Richard handed her the gift. Inside was a framed photograph Margaret on her first day as CEO 20 years younger, standing in front of the building she'd built from nothing. Written on the frame in gold lettering, "Where it started, not where it ended." "I thought you might want to remember," Richard said. "Not the stress or the battles, just the achievement. You built something real, Margaret. That matters even if you're not running it anymore." "Harrison's still destroying it, I assume." "Harrison resigned last month. Turns out being CEO is harder than criticizing one." Richard smiled slightly. "The board's asked me to take over, interim at least." "Richard, that's wonderful. It's terrifying, but I learned from the best." He paused. "I also learned from watching her walk away. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on, it's letting go." "Did I teach you that?" "You taught me a lot of things, including eventually that there's more to life than corner offices." He glanced around the backyard at the mismatched chairs the grocery store cake the family gathered in celebration. "I think you figured that out too." Margaret hugged him. The first hug she'd ever given him in 15 years of working together. He stiffened at first, surprised, then relaxed. "Take care of the company," she said. "I will. Take care of yourself." "I'm learning." The first year of marriage passed faster than any year of Margaret's life. Not because she was busy, she wasn't not in the old way, but because she was present. Every moment felt full instead of frantic. Jackson's 13th birthday arrived with the particular drama of adolescence. He wanted a party. Then he didn't want a party. Then he wanted just pizza with friends. Then he wanted the whole track team. Samuel and Margaret navigated his moods with the patience of exhausted parents everywhere. "Being 13 is hard," Samuel said after a particularly explosive evening. "I don't remember it being this hard." "You probably blocked it out." "I certainly did." The party ended up being pizza and movie night with 5 friends, Jackson presiding over the group with the confident authority of someone who'd finally found his people. Margaret watched from the kitchen, marveling at how naturally he commanded attention. "He's going to be something," she said to Samuel. "He already is something." "I mean professionally. That kid could run a company someday." "God help us all." Samuel handed her a glass of wine. "Though maybe with you in his corner he'll learn to do it without destroying himself." "You think I can teach him that?" "You're teaching him every day. Every time you rest instead of pushing too hard. Every time you ask for help instead of suffering alone. Every time you choose us over ambition." Samuel clinked his glass against hers. "Kids learn from what they see, not what they're told." Jackson's watching a woman who built an empire, lost it, and chose to be happy anyway. That's the best education anyone could get. Margaret thought about the lessons she'd absorbed as a child. Watching her mother work herself to exhaustion. Watching her father disappear. Learning that love was conditional, and success was survival, and needing people was dangerous. Jackson was learning different lessons now. Learning that falling down wasn't the end. Learning that strength could be quiet instead of loud. Learning that family wasn't blood, but choice. "I wish my parents could see this," she said. "Your mom would be proud." "Maybe. Or maybe she'd think I gave up too easily." "Is that what you think?" Margaret considered the question seriously. A year ago, she would have said yes. Would have looked at her current life, small apartment, modest income days, measured in therapy sessions and family dinners, instead of meetings and acquisitions, and seen failure. Now, she saw something else entirely. "No," she said. "I think I finally won." The call from Dr. Patterson came on a Tuesday. Routine checkup, he said. Just wanted to discuss her latest tests. Margaret drove herself to the appointment, drove in a car alone, something she hadn't been able to do for months after the stroke. The independence still felt miraculous, even for mundane tasks. "Your recovery is remarkable," Dr. Patterson said, reviewing her charts. "Motor function almost completely restored. Cognitive tests normal. Heart health stable." He set down the file. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I stopped working. I noticed. You look 10 years younger." "I feel 10 years younger. Also 10 years wiser, which is more important." Dr. Patterson leaned back in his chair. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Margaret. I've seen a lot of patients in your situation. Most of them follow one of two paths. Which are? They either go back to exactly what they were doing before, same stress, same habits, same trajectory toward another stroke, or they shut down entirely. Stop living, just exist. Wait to die. Neither sounds appealing. They're not. But you've done something different. Something rare." He studied her. "You actually changed. Not just your behavior, but your whole orientation toward life. Most people can't do that. I had help. Everyone has help available. Not everyone accepts it." Margaret thought about Samuel, about Jackson, about Ellen and Richard and Angela, and everyone who'd appeared in her life when she needed them most. She thought about her own resistance, her stubborn insistence on handling everything alone, and how wrong she'd been. "I almost died," she said. "That changes your perspective." For some people. For others, it just makes them more determined to prove nothing's different. Dr. Patterson stood, signaling the appointment was ending. "You're one of the lucky ones, Margaret. Don't waste it." "I don't intend to." She stopped at a coffee shop on the way home, a small place she'd discovered during her recovery run by an elderly couple who made mediocre coffee and exceptional conversation. The wife, Marina, had survived cancer. The husband, George, had survived losing his first wife and child in a car accident 40 years ago. They'd found each other at a grief support group, built a life together from the wreckage of their previous ones. "Mrs. Webb," Marina called when Margaret entered. "Where's your handsome husband?" "Working. Someone has to pay the bills." "And your boy?" "The runner." "School, then practice, then homework if I can convince him." Marina pressed a muffin into her hands alongside the coffee. "Growing boys need fuel. You need fuel too. You're looking too skinny." "I'm looking healthy." "Skinny and healthy are not the same thing. Eat the muffin." Margaret had learned not to argue with Marina. The woman had survived things that would have broken most people, and she'd emerged with opinions she wasn't shy about sharing. "My husband wants to know," Marina continued, "when you're going to write a book." "A book. Your story. Building a business, losing everything, finding love. George says it would be inspirational. He reads a lot of inspirational books since he retired." "I don't think my story is particularly inspiring." "Then you're not telling it right." Marina fixed her with a sharp look. "Every story is inspiring if you focus on the right parts. The falling down, that's tragedy. The getting up, that's triumph. Your job is to show people they can get up too." Margaret considered this on the drive home. A book. The idea seemed absurd. She'd never written anything longer than a quarterly report, but something about it stuck in her mind. Her story. Not the company story. Not the success story. The real story about collapse and recovery and learning to live after everything you thought mattered turns out not to matter at all. She mentioned it to Samuel that night, half joking. "A book," he repeated. "Stupid idea, right? Who wants to read about a failed CEO?" "You're not a failed CEO. You're a recovered human. There's a difference." "Still, who would care? Everyone who's ever burned out. Everyone who's ever lost something they thought defined them. Everyone who's ever wondered if there's more to life than achievement." Samuel set down his newspaper. "Margaret, you lived the American dream and discovered it was a nightmare. Then you woke up. That's not a common story. It's embarrassing, admitting I was wrong about everything." That's what makes it valuable. People don't need to hear from more experts who have it all figured out. They need to hear from someone who screwed up and survived. You really think I should write it? I think you should do whatever helps you make sense of what happened. If that's a book, write a book. If it's volunteering, volunteer. If it's becoming a professional pickle maker, I'll support that too. Pickle maker. I'm just saying I'm flexible. Margaret laughed. The easy laugh she'd discovered in this new life, so different from the sharp, controlled humor she'd deployed in boardrooms. I'll think about it, she said. She started writing the next morning. Not a book, not yet just fragments. Memories. The night she collapsed. The first time she tried to walk. The moment she realized her company didn't need her, had never needed her, that she'd built a monument to her own fear and called it success. The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wrote in the early mornings while Samuel slept and Jackson was still dreaming. She wrote during afternoon lulls while the apartment was quiet. She wrote late at night when the memories were sharpest, most painful, most true. You're writing something. Jackson observed one Saturday, finding her at the kitchen table, surrounded by pages. Trying to,